Everybody, this is Perch. And the question that I'm going to talk about today is around growing out of comics, growing up and out of comics. I'm hearing more of that lately. And maybe it's just the type of videos that I'm doing, or it's just that's what's on people's minds. I think when you get like to this time of year, you get toward the end of the year, people get reflective. It feels like in a lot of people's minds that we're at the end of COVID, or we're at the end of this whole pandemic. I'm not entirely sure that's the way it's going to play out, but I think that a lot of people are looking at this as the end of the year. We're heading into the holidays. A lot of companies are expected to, bite the bullet and get people back into the office next year at in January. And I think there's this idea of reflection of, people. A lot of people are doing this process right now. Um, so growing out of comics is something that gets on people's minds, and it's on my mind as well. Not that I have any intention or really any drive of growing out of comics. I think I'm as attached to comics as I've ever been. There's stuff I like, stuff I don't like, but I still find myself excited by all the different aspects of comics. But I'm moving right now, as I mentioned a couple of videos. I'm actually making a very large move, biggest move I've made in more than a decade. It's been a while, and kind of moving down south. So going to be there for a couple of years. And so in the packing process of getting ready to move, I'm like, yeah, I play this interesting game of how many comics do I have? And we're way past the time period where, I can actually count up the comic. Now, granted, I have a lot of them in inventory, but I realized through this process that a couple of years ago, I must have stopped inventorying my personal collection as closely as I used to. So now I'm like counting up long boxes. Like, how many long boxes do I have? And the answer in my house, 68. 68 long boxes. And then outside of my house, I've got a storage unit that I've used for a lot of the back stock, the stuff that's going to go into the comics. And I know there's some boxes in there also, but I'm looking at it and I'm like, at some point I can build a small like Tokyo apartment out of long boxes that I could actually just live in. Put some mortar in there and everything else. But it's a ridiculous amount of comics. But as I'm looking at some of these, I mean, a lot of these comics were bought when I was a teenager, when I was younger, and a lot of this collection kind of stemmed from there. In some cases, maybe even earlier. And it's fascinating to me, kind of seeing the progression of how things went on. I've got all these comics. I don't know if this is true for a lot of you, but when I go back to kind of the very early boxes. What I have in there are a lot of just a lot of comics. I've got titles that I didn't really care about, but they've got sentimental value because it's like, oh man, I remember when I was collecting, Transformers and this limited series, and then it kind of went on, and oh man, they introduced the Dinobots here, and that was pretty cool, and but I don't really have any interest in holding on to these. From a collector standpoint, I don't really care about them. It's not my favorite title, but I have this sentimental value because this is, I was at that point collecting anything I could get my hands on. I had Titans comics there, I have some Legion comics, I have some Batman, I've got, plenty of X-Men. But as I look at like the X-Men gets more love as the years go on. That's an area where I note, I'm looking in my collection, I see that I have multiple copies of the same book. One that's, maybe a graded 9.7, and then one that's fine condition, or a reader copy, if you will, just something that's low. And what happens there is you collect the comic, get some wear and tear because you're young, you don't take as good care of it as you should, and then later in life you're like, this is the series that I want to really own, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to rebuy some of these issues in a more prestige format, in a nicer condition. And so you see, I can track how I've grown up through these comics, where at the beginning there's just a lot of different things in there, and then as I'm getting older, the amount of series starts to narrow and narrow and narrow until I've got fewer series, but better quality, more consistent runs, everything else. And as I was doing this and looking at it, this idea came into my head that was, I kind of miss the old kid me that was just collecting all kinds of things because it was fun. And I don't really like the older me that went into collecting these series and kind of focusing on the quality of the title and making sure everything was perfect. You remember the horror and the nightmare of like you're getting your comic and that you put a board. You put your board down in the comic and then you put it away. And like 10 years later, you're in the comic shop. This happens so many times. And somebody picks up the boards. You pick up the boards and you see the like now with a better finish that protects the comic and keeps the acid out of the thing. And you're like, oh crap, I've got hundreds of comics from boards that I bought kind of on the cheap 10 years ago, not realizing that I wonder if these are degrading or anything. So now you're like obsessed, like, do I need to go back and read bag and board all my comics? Because they're gonna hell, it's an interesting it's an interesting dynamic. Those problems sucked. I didn't enjoy them. And it's funny as I'm going through some of these boxes and I'm opening them up and I'm going and I'm looking at it. The ones that are bringing me the most emotional happiness, the most joy, are those early boxes that just have a ton of different, different crap in them. It's because each one carries with it some level of memory. And to kind of take the idea further, this is one of the areas where when people talk about growing up and growing out of comics, there's lots of things that we hear online all the time, like, oh, the writing changed, oh, the style changed, oh, this or that, or it's just all these different kind of drama changes. There's somebody I know who's like, I can't enjoy anything Frank Miller does anymore. I think that's absurd, but it's like when I all because of this Holy Terror book, it somehow tainted Frank Miller's work for this guy. And I mean, it's fine. Everybody, everybody's an individual. Everybody is going to read and consume and enjoy the comics in their own way. But I think as you get older, it's almost impossible not to let the cynicism creep in, not to let yourself get more and more jaded about the comics that you buy, not to start to, like with anything, as time goes on, you get good memories, you get bad memories. And the bad memories have a way of, taking a lot of the innocent fun out of comics, taking it away. And this is where comics, I think, are at their best when there's as little drama, as little kind of these negative emotions as possible. They're at their best when they're just simple entertainment, when you're just enjoying them. I would argue, and it's one of those things, having run a shop for many, many years and watching people grow up with comics, um, people seemed, and not completely, but people often seemed happiest when they were coming in and just, they weren't worried about even a pull box. I mean, like the more they got consumed with the hobby, the more they worried about getting things bagged and boarded and getting things graded and which comics do we want to slab and how, are we focusing on the diamond, the previews catalog and what are we, all of this, I really want this variant cover because the more people worried about those things, the more they let that into their life, the unhappier they seem to get, or it became more of a business to them. And I'm not to say all this stuff is bad. I think comic collecting is wonderful. Obviously, I've made my business for many, many years. And I think there's something magical and amazing about collecting comics and having that piece. And I mean, the coolest part was always when somebody would come in younger and then get married and then have a kid and they're bringing their baby into the shop and they're like, that you could see the excited dad, like one day you're going to collect Superman like me. I don't know if it ever plays out that way, but just seeing that generational love for comics is magical. It's wonderful. So none of what I'm saying right now is anti-collector, you shouldn't ever get serious about your hobbies. But I do wonder as I see people in the comments and other places talking more and more about kind of growing out of comics. I've just grown past it. I wonder, how much of this is natural of people just aging and, finding other things to enjoy, and how much of it is like the nature of collecting comics, the nature of reading them and understanding them and getting, in depth with the story and the density, all that. How much of that naturally starts to push people out just by what it is? How much of that takes away the escapist fun of comics? It's one of the reasons, not to tie everything into the same topic, but when comics go, I remember having this debate with somebody around Watchmen of, as comics get more dark and get more gritty and get more serious and take on more topics. It's funny, by the way, to think of Watchmen as, dark, gritty, and serious. I mean, it was to some extent, but I mean, the plot still had, this giant squid I mean, you had a naked blue guy flying around. I mean, I don't know how dark and gritty and realistic it really was. I mean, there was realism in it, but I mean, I wouldn't consider that the most realistic comic in the world, especially compared to some of what goes out today. But the more comics try and reflect the world around us, the more I wonder if they're completely missing the point, because maybe comics, not and again, not all of them, but maybe comics shouldn't be the world around us. In many cases, we're trying to escape the world around us. We're trying to open up a portal to some other place to have fun. And again, that's not all comics. There's comics out there that are designed to reflect the world, and there's comics that are dramas, and there are comics that are there's all these different comics. But if you're going to take like the Fantastic Four, or you're going to take the Justice League, and you're going to do a realistic, outside your window kind of take on it, I mean, are you just at some point removing the escapism and you're reminding people of their lives? And are you in some ways, encouraging people to grow up and out? If you want comics to grow up, um, how much of that is in conflict with the very thing that is comics? How much of that just kind of speeds up the process of people eventually leaving it? And is it inevitable that a lot of customers, a lot of readers of comics will ultimately grow out of them? I don't think so. I mean, I think you can push people away. I think we're seeing that right now, where you see a lot of, well, I think a lot of publishers make the comment that, hey, our audience is aging out of comics. And in many cases, the audience isn't aging out of comics, but you're actively pushing them out the door by removing the parts that they loved. And if you do remove the parts they loved, then yes, you're going to get what you're going to get what you're asking for. You're going to push them out. But maybe that's maybe that's harmful to the entire business. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. It's an interesting a thought that I've seen a couple people comment on, and I guess that's where my mind is as well. Do you grow out of comics? Is it inevitable that you're going to grow up and out of comics? And how do you feel about kind of those early days when you were collecting? Were those just the best days for you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. That's it. This would be a fun topic to talk about in a store with a bunch of people in real life, but we'll do it this way for now. Anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for all the support on the move. God, I hate moving, but it is what it is. Thanks for listening.